So one of the challenging things about working with percent questions is identifying what information we have and what information we're looking for. So today when we're talking through some examples of percent of change, I'm going to use this chart. So we have three quantities here. We have our original quantity or amount, we have the amount of change, and then we have our new amount, which will be the original plus or minus the change. And then our original is always 100%. And then we'll have some percent change and some new percent. And the original percent 100 plus or minus the change percent will give us the new percent. So anytime you're stuck on a percent question, you can use this grid to get yourself started. All right, here's the first question. The amount of money you have went from 240 leva to 156 leva when you went shopping. What is the percent of change in your money? All right, so let's fill in what we know. So it says that the amount of money you have went from 240 leva to 156 leva when you went shopping. So that implies that we had 240 leva originally, and then we went shopping, and at the end we had 156 leva. And the question asks, what was the percent change? So this is the amount we are eventually looking for. Now this box I can fill in because I know that if I started with $240 and ended with $156, that is a difference of $84. So I know that I spent $84. So now that I know the amount of change, $84, and the original amount, $240, I can use that to calculate the percent of change. So if you're the type that prefers the proportion method, you might set up the proportion like this. The change over the original is some percent out of 100. And then I would use my cross products to solve for x. And I get 35%. So 35 out of 100 is x, so that's a 35% change from my original money to my money now. If you prefer the percent equation, you may have written 84 is what percent of 240, because that's what we're looking for, is what percent 84 is out of 120. 84 is some percent of 240. And when I solve for x, I would get 0.35, which is 35%. So now when I go back to my grid, I know that that percent of change was 35%. And that means that I have 65% of the money I had when I started because I took 35% away. And the nice thing about the grid is you can check also that if I find 65% of 240, I should get 156. The second question. You had 150 leva. Then a gift from your grandma increased your money by 40%. How much money do you have now? So in this question, the information we have is that I had 150 leva. So that would be the starting amount because that was what I started with. Then a gift from grandma increased your money by 40%. So that's a 40% increase in your money. And the question is, how much money do you have now? So that is the goal. Now I can fill in this box because I know that if I started with 100% and I increased by 40%, I now have 140% of what I started with. So I want to know, what is this new amount? So now I have two options. I could find 40% of 150, the change, and add it to 150 to get to the new amount. Or because I know I now have 140%, I could just find 140% of 150. So let's look at both ways. If I first want to find 40% of 150, I'm looking for that amount. So what is 40% out of 150? And if I use my cross products, x equals 60. So what that means is that the 40% was 60 more leva. So that means that this box here would be a 60 leva change, and my new amount would be 210. Now, let's say I wanted to use the other method. Let's say I wanted to find 140% of 150, and I want to know what that's equal to. So if I set up an equation, 140% or 1.4 times 150 is something. And I get 210, which was my 140%. Question 3. The amount of money you have decreased by 45% after you went shopping. You have 82 leva and 50 stotinki remaining. How much money did you have before you went shopping? So the information we're given here is that the amount of money you have decreased by 45% after you went shopping. So that's a decrease of 45%. And at that point, you have 82.50 remaining. So your new amount is 82.50. And we're looking for how much did you have before you went shopping. Now the other box in this grid I can fill out right now is this one, because I know that if I start with 100%, decrease it by 45, that's going to be 55%. So I have 55% of my money, and I know that that's 82.50, and I'm looking for the original. So what I have here is the part, the 55%, and I'm looking for the whole. So if I'm going to solve that with a proportion, I would say 55 out of 100 is equal to 82.50 out of some whole. If I wanted to write it as an equation, I would say 82.50 is 55% of what number? And that equation would be 82.50 is 0.55 times some number. And then whether I use cross products here and solve for x, or solve the equation here for x, I get x equal to 150 leva. So that means that my original amount, now that I know that, I can calculate the amount of change by simply subtracting 150 minus 82.50 to see how much money I spent. So that would be 67.50. And to double check, I could calculate 45% of 150 and make sure that I get 67.50.